I want to welcome you. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kim Jackson, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Programs at Six and Six Action. Together with our sister organization, the State Innovation Exchange, we work at the intersection of state legislatures and social movements. Six's goal is to make sure that progressive policies don't just get passed, but that we make a difference in people's lives. We believe real power comes from how decisions are made, who gets to speak up, and how laws are carried out. So, welcome to this special briefing on mid decade redistricting, which we are pleased to offer in partnership with our co host today, Common Cause. We're here today because we all believe that voters should choose their representatives and not the other way around. Yet, across the country, we are seeing unprecedented mid decade redistricting efforts that threaten to undermine fair representation and silence communities. As a Georgia State Senator myself, I know firsthand how critical state legislators are to protecting our democracy and fighting against authoritarian rule. It will take all of us, state legislators, advocates, legal experts, activists. It takes all of us to defend against the next attempts in state legislatures to seize permanent power through mid-decade partisan redistricting. And the public is on our side. Just last week, the Indiana Senate president announced that Indiana legislators would not convene for a special session later this year to redraw their congressional maps because they recognized how unpopular the topic is when it comes to rigging democracy among voters. So now I'd like to introduce our co-host for today, Dan Vicuna. Sorry, Dan. Dan Vicuna is the Senior Policy Director at Common Cause, and he will give us a brief overview of the state of play of those gerrymandering efforts that are across the country before we head into our panel discussion with the rest of our speakers. Dan leads Common Cause's fight nationally and is in the states to eliminate barriers to voting and to ensure that Americans can have free access to the ballot and make their voices effectively heard in our democracy. Dan brings more than 2 decades of experience in public advocacy, including stints with the Fair Election Center, the Alliance for Justice, and the League of Conservation Voters. For the first 9 years of his 11 years with Common Cause, Dan's focus with Common Cause's advocacy has been to combat gerrymandering and to ensure fair representation in the halls of power. Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Senator, and you nailed my name. You got it. Thank you. I'm just going to spend a few minutes giving a quick overview on how we got here in this mid-decade redistricting fight and sort of where we're going from here. So you can go ahead and move to the first slide, in which we talk a little bit about what started this whole thing. This 2025 mid-decade redistricting fight began in Texas, of course, where the Trump administration's DOJ sent a letter to Texas political leaders basically demanding that they engage in racial discrimination for the purpose of gaining five more Republican seats in the congressional delegation. And when the Republicans passed that map, it did indeed harm communities of color, added five likely congressional seats where Republicans may or have a better chance to win. So that's what started this whole mess. And so we'll go to the next slide and talk about kind of what happened next. California was kind of one of the first Democratic states to respond in kind. Governor Newsom, of course, called for a map that responded to Texas's additional five Republican seats by drawing a new Democratic map that called for an additional five Democratic seats. The legislature placed that map and a temporary pause on the work of the state's independent commission onto the November 4th ballot the election that just passed a couple weeks ago as Prop 50. And Prop 50 with its new map redrawn to gain Democrats five seats passed overwhelmingly 64 to 36%. I'll just note Common Cause developed a set of fairness principles to determine whether we would oppose Democratic responses to the Trump administration's actions, and California passed our fairness principles, so we did not oppose that map. I would move to the next slide, please. So where are we now? There's been a lot of action since Texas and California both engaged in their redraws. As the senator mentioned, you saw some progress on this in Indiana, where the Senate president announced that they lacked the votes to move forward. Florida, the governor and the House Speaker, there does seem to be a lot of pressure, momentum there toward moving toward a redraw. December 4th, there'll be a House committee hearing, a special committee on a redraw on redistricting. I'll note Florida bans partisan gerrymandering in its state constitution, so we are watching that very closely. Kansas, the effort seems to have stalled to eliminate the one Democratic congressional district there. Missouri, Denise is going to delve into that, talk about the work there and the referendum in response. In North Carolina, Republicans redrew the map there to add one Republican seat. Common Cause went to court. In fact, we were in a preliminary injunction hearing just yesterday, challenging the mid-decade redraw as offensive to the First Amendment. We're making a constitutional claim that it's not allowed. We'll see how that goes. And then there, of course, the efforts in response to the Republican push. Illinois seems to have been likely defeated by now. Some concern among the Black Legislative Caucus that Democrats would have to dismantle some majority Black districts in order to gain a Democratic seat. Maryland seems up in the air, some division amongst the leadership of the legislature there. New York faces some difficult legal hurdles, making it not likely, but there's still discussions about it. In Virginia, the legislature, in order to pass a constitutional amendment, which would be required here because of their bipartisan politician commission, empowering the legislature to do a redraw past one session of the legislature. It's got to pass two different sessions with an election in between. So it'll likely be proposed in the next. So we're going to make sure that they're aware of our fairness principles. And finally, Ohio, which did a mid-decade redraw because it was required to by the state constitution, and that did net Republicans, I think, one or two likely more seats. So that's sort of where we've gone since Texas and California. You can move the next slide, please. I want to talk about some of the advocacy we've done, Common Cause and our allies. We were, really strongly opposed to the Trump administration's effort to manipulate maps this way. We were very active. There's pictures from just a couple of states of our work in Texas and Indiana. This really kind of the standard advocacy tactics of high-profile rallies, marches to the Capitol, lobby days, patching calls to swing legislators who may be skeptical of this effort. All the things that maybe sometimes annoy you guys, but that make things work. And what's some of the messaging we've taken to legislators, right? We've talked about the cost of these special sessions, right? Spending a few hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever it is to get people together to just manipulate maps. There's been concern amongst congressional incumbents. This was an early concern of Texas congressional incumbents about weakening the safety of their seats in order to try to gain more in what may be a decent Democratic year. Just resistance to bullying, to say, why are you letting yourself be pushed around by the Trump administration? Some of the legal liability, which I alluded to in Florida, that's come up in Missouri, where the Constitution allows a redraw. Constitutional originalism, this kind of goes to the heart of some, what we think conservatives, their view of what the framers of the Constitution intended when discussing redistricting, that it's really supposed to be done after the census. And just basically the will of the voters, the notion that this is not something voters are interested in. They want legislators to take care of real problems. We'll go to the penultimate slide, or a couple more, my bad. So just, kind of nearly breaking news just a couple days ago that you probably saw, that a 3-judge panel struck down the Texas map as racially discriminatory. The judge who authored the decision was a Trump-appointed judge, a legit conservative whose work I'm somewhat familiar with, who said substantial evidence shows that Texas racially gerrymandered the 2025 map. Pretty straightforward and not surprising, since that's exactly what the Trump administration asked them to do. These cases, redistricting cases, go from a 3-judge panel straight to the Supreme Court, which Texas is going to file their appeal to the Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens. And then I think now the next slide is the last one with stuff on it. So just some of the impact. I'll confess to being somewhat skeptical at the beginning that we could really move the needle. Generally when President Trump says jump, his supporters in legislatures around the country say how high. But honestly, it made an impact. This is just some of the quotes from a couple of states where we seems like we've won so far: Indiana, Kansas. You can see some of the themes, and then from a Republican congressman from California. The themes are: look, the people don't want this. We're nervous about making the congressional map more difficult for us. We could, accidentally pass a dummy mander. We don't like being blackmailed. Essentially, I think our messages they got through. They penetrated that the public is not interested in this. Spending taxpayer dollars to open special sessions to just try to harm one party's voters. That they should be doing the real work of the people. So. You can just move to the last slide, and just includes my email address if you want to get in touch. I think I put it in there. Yeah. But yeah, that's what's going on around the country. The quick version. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thanks so much for setting the stage for this briefing today. And now I'm really excited to invite the rest of our panel to join us. We are honored to have the opportunity to learn from two leaders from two different states who have already fought redistricting battles. So first, it's my great honor, really, I am so deeply honored to be able to introduce to you all Texas Representative Nicole Collier. She is the first woman to represent Tarrant County's House District 95. And in November of 2024, congratulations, she was reelected to her sixth term in office. Rep. Collier is a respected attorney, a small business owner, a grandmother, and mother of three who spent her life working to obtain the American dream. As a single mother of two before finishing high school, she was bolstered by both her faith and her family to continue her education. Rep. Collier is a graduate of the University of Houston and Texas Wesleyan University School of Law, which is now called Texas A&M University School of Law. And for the last 20 years, Rep. Collier has been a strong advocate for individuals and families and has now taken her skills over to the Texas Capitol. So thank you. I also want to introduce our second panelist, Denise Lieberman. Denise Lieberman is the Director and General Counsel at the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition and is nationally recognized as a voting rights expert and movement lawyer. Prior to her role at the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, Denise spent nearly 15 years in the national voting rights arena, most recently as the Director of Power and Democracy at Advancement Project National Office in Washington, D.C., where she oversaw a $3.2 million program budget for the organization's voting rights work at the national level and in multiple states. Now back in Missouri full-time, Denise is also a faculty director for the Voter Access and Engagement Initiative at Washington University in St. Louis, where she's the adjunct professor of political science and law. She also serves as a consultant for the Brennan Center for Justice. Welcome to both of you. We're so glad to have you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to begin with a question, and hopefully we can also have a conversation today. But I'll begin. Rep. Collier, this question is actually for both of you. Can each of you give the audience a recap of what happened in your respective states? What were some of the key strategies the pro-democracy coalitions employed in your states?
Sure. Thank you for having me on, Senator. I appreciate this. I absolutely enjoy engaging with SIX, and I mean, this panel is amazing. Thank you for including me in this. So, in Texas, as Dan talked about, they got a letter from the Department of Justice. And based on the decision that we heard, we saw from the three-panel federal court, federal judges, it looks like this stuff was already, the fix was in. What we found out through the testimony is that Adam Kincaid had colluded with the White House administration, some administrators from the White House, as well as the Department of Justice, to send a letter to Texas to tell them that they've got to break up these coalition districts, which are coalitions of Black and Brown people of color voters, and they got to break them up because under their opinion that they were unconstitutional. Now, this letter was drafted a week before it was sent. The Governor Abbott was told about it, and the letter went out on July 5th, and it said that you had until July 5th to do something. I mean, the same day that they sent it, they told Texas they had to do something. And so on July 9th, Governor Abbott calls a special session and says that redistricting is a top priority. So this was all done in the back rooms, and it came to light afterwards, and we found out about this through the testimony. So Texas decided that the directive actually was discriminatory because it said break up coalition districts, and Governor Abbott said do what the Department of Justice said. So from the start, it was already unconstitutional, and all they did was make the process hasty. It was thrown together. It was not inclusive of the people. In fact, they ignored 90% of the testimony that said that they were opposed to redistricting. So the Democrats in Texas, 51 of us, there's 62, but 51 Democrats said we were going to use the only tool that we had left to fight, because we know in Texas it takes 76 votes to pass a bill. There's only 62 of us. So anytime they have a regular bill, they're going to win. So the only nuclear option we have is to deny quorum, which is legal. And so we worked together. In fact, we had to come up with a plan. We came up with a plan of what we were going to do. What were some goals that we were going to set? We set 3 goals, and everybody agreed to those goals. And when those goals were met, we decided that we were going to reevaluate what the next steps were. And working together, we were able to accomplish those 3 goals. One was to kill the first legislative session, the special session. The second was raise a national attention about what's going on in Texas. And then the third thing was to get other states that are led by Democrats to agree to redistrict their states. And so when all 3 of those things came together, we met with Governor Newsom in California. He said he was going to be on board as long as his congressional members were going to be okay with it, and that it would have to be approved by the voters. So when those things came in place, that's when the quorum was restored. Now, I wasn't part of the original quorum restoration, but I did come in. And it was then that the Speaker of the Texas House announced that if any Democrat who denied quorum wanted to leave, they would have to sign a permission slip agreeing to be released into the custody of police. And it was at that point that when I heard that, I was like, wait a minute, we don't have to do that. That's not allowable. Now you can have a civil detention and have us brought back to the Capitol, but we don't have the ability to be required to be released into the custody. And those are things, words matter. And when I heard those words, I was like, wait a minute, they're asking our permission to detain us. Why do you have to give permission to be detained? You don't. And recognizing what your free will and your power is one of the first things that we have to remember, that you have the ability to say no. And I did. And from there, it sparked a whole national, more attention to what was happening in Texas. So never giving up the fight, making sure that we're paying attention to what's going on. So that's basically how we got to where we are today, but working together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Denise, do you want to talk about your state?
Sure. Thank you so much, Representative Collier. And you're right, the words matter. And that's what we are finding here in Missouri, too, as we fight back against similar attacks. So very shortly after Texas began its gerrymandering attempt, the news headlines began flying. Missouri is next. Missouri is next. And those initial news headlines were met by pretty widespread opposition on both sides of the political aisle. Lawmakers were not really interested in buying into this. And yet, within a couple of weeks, that changed. And the Missouri governor, Mike Kehoe, called an extraordinary session. Missouri lawmakers were not in session at this time. Our legislative session concludes in mid-May. But there's a provision in our state constitution that allows for lawmakers to come together during the significantly long break that they have should something extraordinary happen. For example, back in June, following some massive tornadoes that destroyed major parts of St. Louis, lawmakers came back for a special session to talk about providing relief. That's the session that the governor called here for the purpose of redrawing Missouri's congressional district lines. And I say that because one of the lawsuits that's going on right now argues that the session was not appropriately called and under the Constitution. And if the court agrees, anything that they did, including passing these maps, is null and void. The state has delayed and delayed and delayed on that trial, and that case is set for December 15th. So lawmakers came together and in record time, like in Texas, suddenly there was a piece of legislation that no lawmaker had actually seen, redrawing Missouri's congressional district maps to with the purpose of eliminating one of Missouri's 2 Black congressional representatives, that of 11-term Congressman Emanuel Cleaver in Kansas City, a former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the former mayor of Kansas City, someone who, in these days, it's hard to find somebody who is a legislator who's sort of beloved by all, but this congressman was, as attested by the fact he kept getting elected over and over and over again. And the way that they did this was, so we've got, Missouri is a mostly rural state with our 2 largest urban centers at the opposite ends of the state. That one borders Illinois, St. Louis, which is where I'm dialing in from, and Kansas City. And those are the 2 democratically held congressional seats, and both held by African Americans. So before even stepping into this ring, Missouri was already heavily gerrymandered. Democrats make up about 40% of Missouri voters, Republicans about 60%, yet already Democrats were only getting 25% of the representation. So this was to more significantly gerrymander this. And they did so in a way that Missouri lawmakers had already rejected. After the 2020 census came in, they considered a map that would be a 7-1 map. We have 8 congressional districts, and they rejected that. That's exactly what was put forth. And the legislator who carried this legislation clearly had no knowledge of what was in this bill. When asked at legislative hearings questions about why was it drawn this way, he could not answer that question. When asked who prepared this map, he could not answer that question. And moreover, the way that this came out, they sliced Kansas City, which is clearly a community of interest. It's a single city. They sliced Kansas City into 3 pieces, cutting right through a street called Troost. Now, for those of you not in Missouri, you may not have heard of Troost. Apparently, the bill sponsor didn't either. When Missouri lawmakers asked, "Are you aware of the significance of Troost?" the bill sponsor said, I'm not familiar with that. I don't know. That provoked Congressman Emanuel Cleaver to leave Washington, D.C. that night and fly in so that he could be present at the Senate hearing the next day and provide a bit of a history lesson. And he described Troost as Missouri's Mason-Dixon line. Okay, and the reason for this, it is the racial dividing line. And that's because of the history of systemic discrimination. Until passage of the Fair Housing Act, African Americans were not allowed to live west of Troost in Kansas City. And that's why this community is such a strong political community of color. And so by splitting that up, it dilutes the votes of communities of color. But even more so, this map now places a portion of urban African Americans in Kansas City in the same congressional district all the way across the state with farmers on the Illinois and Iowa border who are equally entitled to representation, but their interests are clearly quite different. They are not the same communities of interest. And clearly, as well, this is not a continuous map. And our Constitution requires that district lines be drawn as continuously as possible to contain communities of interest. We fought back, and I think the power of the fighting back to this rests in coalitions like the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, which is a permanent state voting rights table in our state. We already had over 70 affiliated organizations ready to go before this even started. And so we were able to mobilize our partners to the Capitol immediately when the measures were introduced in immediate hearings, like 1 day notice. 24 hours notice is required under our open records laws, and that's about all they gave us. And we were able to get a record 5,000 people to descend on the Capitol Rotunda and march through the Capitol while Missouri lawmakers were in session. They did so peacefully, but it did disrupt the process because you could feel the Capitol almost bouncing with the weight of their marching. And it made clear, and we were able to really capture the narrative because the media that day was Missourians don't want this. Missourians show up in droves on a Tuesday in September, taking off work, taking off school at a time when nobody would ever otherwise be in the Capitol to make their voices heard. We were then able to coordinate testimony, bringing people back because, of course, they wouldn't hold the hearings on the day that we were in the Capitol. They almost did, and they found out we were coming, and they scheduled them for the next day. And so we had to invite people to return back to the Missouri Capitol. And we filled those hearing rooms, 6-7 hours of testimony. By the time Congressman Cleaver returned the next day for the hearing in the Senate, and this is how quickly it went, not a single piece of testimony in favor of the bills. Not a single piece of testimony supporting these measures. When they went into session, Missouri senators got a call. I was in the Capitol when this happened. They were setting the rules for debate, and they got a call from Donald Trump urging them to suspend the rules. And that's what they did, using something that we call here also the nuclear option. But in this case, what it did is it called the previous question, and it meant that no further debate was going to be allowed. And so no opposing member of the Missouri Senate was allowed to speak on the floor and offer their objections, and they passed it immediately. So this began phase 2 of our process. Missouri's Constitution, and this is where I think every state lawmaker should have your staff get familiar with these pieces of your state constitutions because they're each different. Missouri's Constitution provides for a clear right of the citizens to repeal measures, legislative measures, pieces of legislation, bills that are passed by the legislature that they don't approve with. It's called the referendum process, and our state constitution makes very clear that that right is reserved to the voters. But they have a very short time to do it. And so on the day that the legislation passed, we filed the paperwork for this referendum process. It requires us to get signatures of 5% of valid registered voters in 6 out of 8 Missouri's congressional districts, about 117,000 signatures across the state of Missouri. We filed that paperwork, constituted the campaign called People Not Politicians, MO, and began collecting signatures. Within 1 month, over 100,000 signatures had been collected. But there were shenanigans at play. And I'm almost done here. There were shenanigans at play. After passage of this piece of legislation that our governor so urgently pushed on Missouri lawmakers, he stalled in signing the bill into law. It was passed on September 12th. He waited until September 28th to sign the bill into law. And then our Secretary of State, Denny Hoskins, stalled even further in certifying the referendum measure. He waited until October 12th, a month after, and then falsely announced that any signatures collected prior to that date would be invalid and not counted, and anybody who signed prior to that date was guilty of an election offense. This is not true. Missouri's Constitution makes clear that the referendum process is triggered by one thing only: the act of the legislature in passing the measure and the filing of the paperwork, which was done correctly. Now, the National Republican Committee has been sending disinformation text messages across the state, telling people that if they signed this petition, they did so wrongly, and to call a number if they wish to retract their signature. In addition, our campaign is made up of many, many volunteers, but there's also paid signature gatherers, because in a state like Missouri, you can't get through all of those districts without it. Paid signature gatherers, particularly in the Kansas City area that is most impacted by these changes, have been approached and offered, not kidding you, $10, $20, and $30,000 to quit their jobs and refuse to collect signatures and not turn in their sheets. And at least 2 people took them up on that offer. These are low wage jobs, right? Those people have been fired from the campaign, but it's led to this widespread disinformation campaign. Meanwhile, we're in court. There are 4 lawsuits, one challenging the consecration of the special session overall, that if we win, anything done should be voided. 2, challenging the maps themselves. This is a case that is being litigated by the ACLU and Campaign Legal Center, saying this is not a continuous map. You're splitting up a community of interest, dilutes votes of African Americans and Latinos. 3rd is a case that I'm working on, challenging that mid-decade redistricting is unconstitutional. That's why the language of your state constitution matters. In Ohio, it's allowed. In Missouri, it very explicitly says the one time when congressional redistricting can occur, and it's only when new census data is certified to the governor. This differs from state to state, but that language here has been interpreted to mean that we can only do it when we get new census data. That case is called Luther v. Hoskins, and we had a bench trial in that case last week. And then another case filed by the campaign itself, saying that the Secretary of State does have to count those other 100,000 signatures that happened during the first month. And in that case, the Republican State Committee has intervened. It's actually intervened in all of our cases, and they're stalling. They have been putting in procedural measures, requesting changes of judges. That case was supposed to go to trial 2 weeks ago. The judge got sick. Then it got assigned last week. They were ready to go. And then the Republican committee said it wanted discovery. And when the judge said, no, we're ready to go, they asked for a change of judge. And then a week later, the Secretary of State asked for another change of judge. And now the trial date is off the table. And so we won't know necessarily by the date that these signatures have to be submitted, which is December 11th, it's a very short turnaround, whether the first 100,000 are going to be counted, even though the law makes it very clear. So at this point, the campaign has over 200,000 signatures, and quality control is going well, but we're up in our game. And I want to just echo the importance of the language, because each state may have different rules and different rights that you can take advantage of. And by starting out strong, I think you can, and bringing all the grassroots partners together, you can help control the narrative. And the narrative here is that the people of Missouri will have the right to decide the fate of Missouri's congressional maps.
Thank you for that, Denise. And that's actually a really great pivot, because I want us to talk a bit about, we know that ultimately these things are going to end up in courts, right? So you've named where you all are in courts. Rep. Collier, we got the incredible news that your maps have been blocked by the first pass in the courts. And so can you all talk about, and this, Dan, please jump in here too. Can you talk about the strategy that happens both in the committee room and on the floor to prepare and kind of set the stage for what we know is coming in terms of the courts? Like, Rep. Collier, I'm curious, did you all talk about that? Were there certain words, certain things that you raised in committee to make sure it went on the record to prepare for a case?
Oh, absolutely. Making sure that you have legal counsel that could help, with the record, setting the record. I will say in Texas, though, they passed a law that said um, communications from the front and back mic when you're asking questions cannot be used in the court of law to help interpret what the law is. So, I mean, literally, I was trying to make sure people understood, that is very dangerous because all they can do is read the four corners of the document and they can't take what the intent, legislative intent, into consideration. So that was something that was passed during the regular session, but it impacts what happened in the special session. So in terms of making sure that, what is the case? It's about what's left of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, making sure that the process was explained, who it impacts, gathering testimony, and working with our friends, our allies, and the advocacy groups. Labor was so vital to this effort. I mean, our friends in labor really held us up and helped us through. And so working with our allies was very important, but making sure that we had factual testimony, being prepared for those who were on the committee and those who were coming to testify. What were those things that would be key in trying to help support a legal battle?
Yeah, that's helpful. Dan, can you speak maybe a little bit more broadly about how to best set up for what we know is coming in terms of things being challenged in the courts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one through line through basically all of these states, and it's something that it came to the fore when we talked to our staff in the states about what would be required for, say, Republicans to squeeze more seats, is a tax on communities of color. Like that is what started this in Texas. Almost calling for very loudly in that DOJ letter. Through and every state where we have staff, they've said, yeah, you've got to split up communities of color, dilute their vote in order to make this work to squeeze more Republican seats. And so that's begging for federal lawsuits, the likes of which just succeeded in Texas. And then in the states, there are also state constitutional bans on partisan gerrymandering that are very clear, that say it explicitly. You have an increasing number of states that are interpreting equal protection, state constitutional provisions on equal protection on the First Amendment, interpreting that to ban partisan gerrymandering. So I think, that's something that as an organization that is often a party to these kind of lawsuits, we're keeping a close eye on. Like I said, we're making a somewhat novel argument in North Carolina where we're making the case that, starting a special session specifically to do a mid-decade redraw for the sole purpose of discriminating against one party's voters, that violates the First Amendment. So those are the kind of things we look at.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I appreciate you all kind of helping legislators think about a floor strategy as we face additional special sessions. I'd like to turn, Rep. Collier, I'd like to turn to you because you inspired me, you inspired so many legislators, I think, across the country. You inspired the nation. And you really showed a lot of courage and took a lot of risk as an elected official that resonated with the public. And so I'm just curious, what advice would you give to your legislative colleagues in other states that are preparing for redistricting power grabs when it comes to leveraging their own power as elected officials? Would you encourage further resistance? What advice would you provide?
When the Democrats in Texas denied quorum and some of us who went to Illinois, Leader Hakeem Jeffries came to visit us. And there were some who were like, what do we do next? What's next? We were at the point where the first special session was ended. They canceled it. They ended it early. And there were some like, what do we do next? And he said, I don't know what you do next, but you will know in that moment. And you need to be able and courageous enough to do it. And he said, I don't know what is ahead of you, but be ready. And when I think about that, because I was in the room and I heard him say that, and when the speaker said, you got to sign a permission slip to go into the custody, I was like, wait, why do we have to do that? And just don't get tired. That was one of the things. There were so many people who were tired. They were split from their families, their children, their grandchildren. But we don't have the ability to get tired. We can't get tired. We have to continue to press on and remember that we remove self and we remember that we're working for the people. And I think that was something that resonated with me. And I'm just a fighter. I mean, literally, as Black women, there's so many challenges that we go through. every single day. And so I'm not new to this. I'm true to this in terms of like being a fighter. And I look for those opportunities, and I'm okay with standing alone. I'm comfortable being by myself in the fight. And sometimes that's how you have to be. You know, if you know in your heart and your gut that this is where you need to stand, then that's where you need to be, and hold that line. And I don't even have any like great words to explain it, what it is. But if it's in you, you'll do it, and you'll know when to do it, when it's time to do it. So yes, we have to continue to resist. And I think about what's happening in Washington in terms of what we're seeing play out. Where's the morality, the humanity, and people? Have we lost that? It's like people are watching a piece of trash that's sitting on the ground, and everybody's walking by it. Nobody's picking it up. When are people going to recognize that we're going down the wrong path? This is not what America was built on. Let's reclaim that and redirect the path, the future path of America, and picking up that trash and throwing it out, and get back to the basics and back to the people, give it back to the people. So I think that if we all remember that we have a say in our government and in our future, and we have the ability to change it if we start acting on it. So I think that we have to have ownership in our future. And when we have ownership in our future, and it's hard because it's struggling. People are struggling. We're all struggling. Wages are low. You know, we don't earn livable wages. Rent is high. Mortgages are high. Interest rates. And it's hard to feel that connection, but you've got to pull deep within, and remember that this country, you belong here, and you have a vote and a voice, and use it. You can use your power for the good of our country.
Yeah, thank you so much. I read in a book somewhere, just do not grow weary in well-doing. And that's what your words reminded me of that adage, to not grow weary, because this is a long journey, and certainly your colleagues were away for a long time. And so I really appreciate those encouraging words. Denise, I'll ask as a final question to you, a similar question. You all mobilized 5,000 people in 24 hours to show up at a Capitol, to literally shake the Capitol with their bodies in their presence. How does that happen? And what's the messaging? How do we inspire that type of work in other states? You talk about the coalition building that happened long, long before that day. Yeah, just help us with how do we do these same things in the states where this is going to happen again?
Absolutely. When we first heard that it was possible for this to come to Missouri, we did a series of emergency meetings across the state where we talked about this and invited people to come to their local communities. We partnered with labor, and I have to also give a shout out to our partners in labor who really got the word out to their members. And each of these emergency meetings, we were filling the rooms across the state. And at those meetings, we said, here's what comes next. We're going to descend on the Capitol. And the day that we're going to do it is likely this day when we already know they're going to be there. And we weren't sure, actually, if they were going to be hearing the bills on that day or not. We knew it was the day that lawmakers had to be back for a veto session, and that they were going to be there. And it turns out, but we also knew that they had a limited timeline, so it had to happen that week. And so we put the word out, and everybody jumped in to do it together. And I do think that in part, it was because we had enduring relationships amongst community partners. Those of you that work with coalitions know that there can be some tug and pull sometimes in these spaces. And here it was nobody, no one's trying to take the glory. We're all in this together. And also, I think having a media strategy at the ready, talking points at the ready. This is about the power to the people. This is about what the people want. The people get to decide. And that's always been the message. And people, regular citizens, that resonates with them because it is about their lives and their ability to make their voices heard about matters that they care about being in community with their fellow citizens in their own cities. And finally, I would say, and this is something that we've had to do a lot more of, look to your state constitutions. Here in Missouri, we've pretty much disbanded federal litigation because we're not in a good district to do so. And we've had courts say that voters don't have standing to bring challenges under the Voting Rights Act, and that came out of our jurisdiction. So our state constitution, though, has some surprisingly powerful protections, because we had a new constitution that was written during Reconstruction that actually affords a fundamental right to vote. I know, who would have thought Missouri has a fundamental right to vote, that provides these powers to the people. And literally, the section on referendum said the people retain the power to overturn acts of the legislature. And so by really understanding the rights that our own Constitution gave to us, we were able to capitalize on those.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm really grateful for the wisdom of turning to, this is one moment, I guess, where having 50 different constitutions can be really useful. And I'm glad that we have lawyers and legal minds who can help us think through how to use those. We're going to turn to Q&A in just a moment, but want to make sure, Dan, is there anything that you want to add around messaging strategy? You all do this across the nation. Would love to invite your voice into that as well.
Yeah, I think, voters are not nearly as partisan as, elected officials, legislators, they even, we did some polling over the summer showing that overwhelming majorities of, Democrats, Republicans, Trump voters think that redistricting should be done by, nonpartisan bodies, that one party shouldn't control the process, that Congress should step in and ban mid-decade redistricting, ban partisan gerrymandering. In fact, just a few years ago, for the first time ever, the House of Representatives passed a bill that would have required independent redistricting commissions to draw congressional districts in every state that's got more than one congressional district. It hit a wall with the filibuster in the Senate, and this is obviously not going to be a Congress where things move, but it's a long-term project, and I think there's great work to be done. The people believe in fundamental fairness, even partisans on all sides of the aisle.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder that the people are not as partisan as elected officials often are, myself included. So I really appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point. Thanks to the panel.